Okay, I'm getting real tired of making time-sensitive videos. That said, I'm finally done with my Booster Course Pass retrospective series, and so I can finally focus on other content. We aren't done with Mario Kart yet, though. Literally, the day after I finished writing the script for my Wave 1 video, the Switch 2 was finally revealed, and with it, we got our first look at a brand new Mario Kart game. For simplicity's sake, we're just gonna call it 9 since it'll be a mouthful every time I have to say something like Mario Kart for the Switch 2 or whatever. So yeah, we're a little under 2 weeks out from the Switch 2 Direct at the time I'm writing this, so I want to quickly get my predictions out since we're in even more of a blank slate than we were when I did my BCP prediction video, considering I'm actually getting this out before we know anything about the game for real. What we do know is that we will have 24 player races in the new game. All of the characters we've seen so far have been pretty standard picks, though it is nice to have confirmation that characters like Pauline are going to be here from the start this time. And we also know that the character models are being updated to give the game a more cartoony look that calls back to some of the older Mario Kart games. The biggest example of this, of course, being Donkey Kong. We also know of one new track, being the Route 66 inspired Mario Bros. Circuit. I want to call attention to this specifically because this is a very promising first track shown off. I'm not sure if this is going to be the starter track for the game or if it's going to be our Mario circuit. It's a bit hard to tell based on the name, but no matter if this is what they're going for with a circuit track in this game, then I'm very excited to see what the other Nitros in this game do. If they're already showing this much creativity with what is usually one of the most simple course archetypes, then I imagine we're in for a treat when it comes to the new Bowser's Castle and Rainbow Road tracks. Given I know people did say that about Mario Kart 8's Rainbow Road before it was revealed and it ended up being kind of a letdown, so I guess we'll just have to hold judgment a bit longer just to play it safe. I don't want to get too deep into predicting Nitro tracks since it's borderline impossible to do so with any Mario Kart game. It's surprisingly rare for them to do tracks that directly call back to a main series Mario game, so while it could hypothetically be easy to throw out something like New Donk City or something related to the Flower Kingdom, it's much more likely that they give us some shit like a laundromat and call it a day. And don't get me wrong, I'll eat up a laundromat course any day of the week. What I really want to cover, and this shouldn't be surprising considering how much I've been talking about the Booster Course Pass, is the retro tracks. Assuming, of course, we are getting them. Personally, even if they do go in a new direction with the Nitros in this game, I think they'll still want to include retro tracks so that longtime fans can still get a more traditional experience out of this game. At the very least, I'm sure we'll see some as DLC, but I really think they'll show up in the base game. I'm going to make 6 cups worth of predictions. While it is entirely possible that they go for the traditional 32 track setup for the base game before giving us more as DLC, I, like many others, think they may go for 48 instead, considering that's how many tracks 8 Deluxe had at launch, and after doubling that track count, I think 48 base game courses will be much easier for people to swallow when transitioning from 8 to 9. This means we will be predicting a total of 24 courses. To make things simple, I'm going to do the typical shell, banana, leaf, lightning layout for the cups, but I'm going to sandwich the egg and bell cups in the middle, as those were the 2 cup names from the Wii U DLC that weren't directly tied to a crossover. The egg cup is going in between the banana and leaf cups to serve as a transition between flower and star cup tracks, while the bell cup will be in between the leaf and special cups, meaning it can contain star and special cup courses. Going off of this, each cup will generally contain tracks from its Nitro equivalent, with some exceptions here and there. Now for some base guidelines I'm going to stick to. In general, I'm going to mostly stick to either tracks that have never appeared as a retro at all, and or tracks that were remade and toured that did not appear in 8. This way we can potentially preserve some more tour content, while also putting an emphasis on tracks that haven't had the chance to return yet. While I do think popular tracks like Coconut Mall and Waluigi Pinball have a chance to return in this game, I think picks like that are generally going to be saved for DLC in order to give the base game its own unique appeal. That said, tracks like Luigi's Mansion that appeared as a retro in both Tour and another game qualify for the predictions, so long as they have enough of a visual and or mechanical overhaul to justify preserving the Tour version. I also have a couple cases where I bring back a track that has not appeared since either DS or Wii, as those tracks were remade when retros are more or less just direct ports and haven't been given the chance to have a more modern remake. I'll also shoot y'all completely straight and say that some picks here were entirely made out of personal bias one way or another. Generally, I tried to keep things balanced, but there were definitely some courses I just wanted to include for my personal sake. At the end, however, I do want to bring up some honorable mentions, as there were some courses I really would have liked to include but did not for one reason or another. I'm also going to go through these much quicker than I usually talk about courses in my other videos, so don't expect any particularly deep analysis of any of these outside of some brief reasoning for why I picked them. All that said, let's get into it. My Shell Cup pretty much only consists of tracks that were in the Mushroom Cup in their previous games. While Shell Cups do tend to have the occasional Flower Cup track in them, I think with 6 cups there's more than enough room for extra Flower Cup courses outside of the Banana Cup. To start off, we have GBA Peach Circuit. While there were absolutely alternative options for a retro starter course like Wii Luigi Circuit and DS Figure 8 Circuit, I think Peach Circuit is a good pick since it got a glow up in Tour. It is of course a very simple course even so, but it's a starter course, so what did you really expect? Next is Wii U Water Park. Again, I know there were better options even from Wii U, but I think this is a good early showcase for underwater driving and anti-gravity, assuming both of those return. Personally, I don't mind this course as much as a lot of other people do anyway, and I think it's a good calm before the storm before we get into the heavier hitters. 3DS Shy Guy Bazaar follows this, giving us a nighttime course for a bit of aesthetic variety. I will go on and say I think I went a tiny bit overboard with desert courses, but Shy Guy Bazaar is different enough that I think it isn't too big of a deal. Not to mention, it was apparently originally planned to show up in the Wii U DLC for Mario Kart 8, and considering it didn't even return in the Booster Course Pass, we are more than overdue to finally have this course return on console. Finally, one of the least surprising picks here is Toad's Factory from Wii. Considering this is pretty much the last major fan favorite from Wii that hasn't been remade, it is a no-brainer to include it here. Not to mention, it is a perfect ending course for the Shell Cup. Moving on to the Banana Cup, these courses are going to be more of a Flower Cup quality. Definitely a step up from what's in the Shell Cup, but nothing too crazy just yet. First is Wii Mario Circuit, and to be honest, this is purely to fill the obligatory Mario Circuit retro slot. I would have gone for 3DS Mario Circuit, but this ended up being the last course I picked for this prediction, and as it was, I already had 3 3DS courses, as opposed to a lot of other games where I only had 2. Plus, this is one of the only Mario Circuits left to be remade as is, and I wasn't quite sure how I would have felt putting something like SNES Mario Circuit 4 this early on, so that's how this conclusion more or less came about. Wii's is probably one of the easiest Mario Circuits in the series too, so it works to transition out of the Shell Cup. Moving on is another very simple course, being SNES Koopa Beach 1. While this course is a simple circle, I do think they could spruce it up to modernize it a bit. Maybe add some dunes you can trick off of, and maybe some alternate underwater paths. This course was originally a Star Cup course, but I think when it comes to SNES tracks, you can more or less bump them down a cup in terms of difficulty when bringing them into a modern day game. I'd honestly even argue this one could be a Shell Cup course, but I'm still okay with it being Banana instead. Next is DS Delfino Square, which is honestly one of the more personal choices for me. It's a big fan favorite from DS, one of the last to be left out of 8, and it's never appeared since Wii. Not even Tour remade it. I think it is more than overdue for a modern day remake. Finally, we have Wii U Shy Guy Falls, which I think is just a solid cup ender for the Banana Cup. It's absolutely trickier than the other tracks that came before it. It has some really cool use of anti-gravity, and generally it's a very good representative of Mario Kart 8. It's one of those courses that isn't necessarily a fan favorite, but it's also exciting enough to keep people from questioning its inclusion. Next is the Egg Cup, which is a bit of a transition transition between flower difficulty and star difficulty courses. First is Vanilla Lake 2. I figure one of the Vanilla Lake courses could be a good fit to start this cup, especially since we haven't really had any ice courses yet. Vanilla Lake 2 is also a bit more interesting than 1, since there's the gaps in the ice that could potentially be used for shortcuts. I will say though, I've heard an idea thrown around about having a Vanilla Lake remake that combines both versions, starting with 1 and having it crumble away Grumble Volcano style to create Vanilla Lake 2. And if that is in any way possible for Nintendo to do, then I would love for that to take this slot instead. Next, we have another very predictable course being Tour Piranha Plant Pipeline. Look, I know this is an obvious pick, but I need it to return in Mario Kart 9. Like, this course alone is the main reason I don't want them to ditch retro courses in the base game. It needs to be playable year-round in a game that isn't potentially going to shut down at a moment's notice. I think it's simple enough to appear in a flower difficulty cup, but I also think it has enough going on to justify a slight bump up on the cup list, hence its inclusion in the Egg Cup. After that is GBA Yoshi Desert, another GBA track that got a remake in Tour. Originally, this is in the Star Cup, but I think even with its modern overhaul, it works a bit better in a slightly easier cup. I'd love it if the piranha plants in the quick stand actually hide underneath it like they do in Super Circuit, but even if they just pop out the middle again like in Tour, I'll take it, as long as they're still there. Finally, we end off with Electrodrome, which is one of the bigger fan favorites from Wii U. It definitely brings a unique atmosphere that most Wii U tracks don't have, and it would absolutely stand out in this retro track selection as well. We do tend to get 1 or 2 direct fan favorites from the previous game anyway in each game's retro selection, so this one would absolutely fit. The Leaf Cup is next, fully bumping us up into Star Cup difficulty with no in-between. Starting off is Super Bell Subway, the only DLC pick I have from Wii U. Now personally, I just prefer this to Sunshine Airport, but if you prefer that track to this, feel free to consider that as an alternative pick for this slot. I think Subway definitely works in a Star Cup setting. The trains and split pads add a lot of complication to this course, while also providing a very unique experience. It's definitely a bit tricky to tell exactly where a course would go that hasn't already been in one of the traditional cup types, similar to Pipeline, but I do think this is a good spot for Subway. N64 Wario Stadium is next, surprise surprise. I don't think there's anything I could say here that hasn't already been said. It's originally Star Cup, so it's a no-brainer for the Leaf Cup, and if you're watching this video, you probably already know why it's here, but for the sake of anyone who may not know, it's the only N64 track that's never been remade. I am neither the first nor the last person to point that fact out. Moving on, I included Mushroom City from Double Dash. Now, this was actually a really hard decision for me to make because I really wanted to include Mushroom Bridge as well, especially since it got a remake in Tour. Ultimately though, Mushroom City has never been remade in general, while Bridge was also in DS. I would love to see Mushroom Bridge as DLC, but for the base game, City wins out. Finally, we have Maka Woohoo from Mario Kart 7. I chose this purely out of personal preference. There are definitely other 3DS courses I could have gone for, and even if I did a Woohoo course, Woohoo Loop could have been in my Banana Cup. Thing is, I've always preferred Maka Woohoo, so I wanted to fit it in here one way or another. Simple as that. With it being a one-lapper, I also really think it would be a fitting end to this cup. Our second to last cup is the Bell Cup, which is made of harder Star Cup and easier Special Cup courses. Opening it up is 3DS Wario Shipyard, a nighttime underwater course that has a lot going on and a decently complicated layout. Everything about this very much gives off potential Special Cup energy in my eyes, though if it were to be in a Special Cup, it would most definitely be starting it. Next is GBA Lakeside Park, which is another track I personally just want, since it's one of the last big GBA courses I want to see remade in a console game. It was the last retro course in Tour, so it already has a new version that could be adapted into a console game, and considering it only appears in one tour of the loop rotation, I want an official way to play it year-round. Also, while it's a Special Cup course, it is simple enough in its layout to justify appearing in a slightly earlier cup, though if they did bring back the ramps that bump you to an earlier portion of the track if you don't drift correctly, then I could absolutely make an argument for it to appear later on. Next is Wii Dry Ruins, the only Wii course in Tour that did not come to 8, so it's a pretty obvious shoo-in. While I do have 2 other desert courses in this prediction, I think all 3 are different enough and spaced out enough that shouldn't be a huge deal. Shy Guy Bazaar gives an easier track with a unique setting that feels nothing like any other desert course. Yoshi Desert is a bit more traditional and plays it straight the most, but it is also a bump up in difficulty. Dry Dry Ruins is the hardest, being the only one to appear in a special cup, and it's unique having the back half of it take place in a pyramid with the filling sand gimmick. Finally, we have Airship Fortress. Again, obvious pick. It's probably the most notable exclusion from the Booster Course Pass, considering it is a fan favorite that actually returned in Tour and also got a noticeable visual overhaul in that game. Not really much else to say there, just bring it into 9 and most people will be happy. I also ended this cup with it since it's more or less a Bowser course, so I feel those tend to be good cup enders when there isn't also a Rainbow Road. The final cup, of course, is the Lightning Cup, purely consisting of special cup courses. To start, we have N64 Banshee Boardwalk, and I honestly just want this one to come back. It's one of the only DS retros left that hasn't returned again that I feel like had wasted potential coming back there. Boo Lake, as it appeared in Tour in 8, is a great blueprint as to how they could touch this one up. I don't know, Banshee Boardwalk just feels like a track with so much potential that currently just doesn't get much attention, and I would love to see what they could do with it. Next is Wii U Cloud Top Cruise, which I just think is a really solid pick for the Lightning Cup. I'd say it's definitely leaning into fan favorite status among the Wii U courses, and there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. Not to mention, it's our only option for a Sky themed course since Sky Garden is excluded from being in the running based on my guidelines. I also think it's a bit more interesting than Banshee Boardwalk 2, which is why it's placed later in this cup. I also just want to point out, it's the Lightning Cup, and there is literally lightning as an obstacle in this course, so take that as you will. Now, of course, we're going to end this cup with the Bowser's Castle and a Rainbow Road, but which 2 am I going to go for? While I did almost choose 3DS Bowser's Castle since it appeared in Tour, I instead went for GameCube since it hasn't appeared yet, and I honestly just needed one more GameCube course for the list since most of my other options were eliminated one way or another. I'd argue that this is one of the more loved Bowser Castle courses as well, and considering we rarely get to see 3D Bowser's Castles get remade, I don't think many people would complain about seeing it here. That is, unless you were banking on GameCube's Rainbow Road. Instead though, my Rainbow Road pick is GBA. For one, it'll be nice to get at least one GBA remake that wasn't already in Tour, not to mention the whole trend of them going in order when remaking the Rainbow Roads. I know that 3DS and Wii had their Rainbow Roads in the Booster Course Pass and Tour, but honestly, outside of the fact that those are both probably the 2 most popular Rainbow Roads, I think since they were the 2 most recent ones before 8, I think they were just working their way backwards so they could continue going in order with the new games. Given that doesn't necessarily account for DLC, and there's very much a chance that we get GameCube and or DS Rainbow Road as DLC in 9, but that all remains to be seen. Now I just want to list off some honorable mentions that I couldn't include for one reason or another. Starting with Super Mario Kart, I would love to see Mario Circuit 4 and Ghost Valley 3. The latter was planned for Tour but never got finished, so I could absolutely see them finishing it for this game. Both of those courses I could see getting big overhauls like Bowser Castle 3 did, and the only reason they weren't here is because I just couldn't find a good spot to include them. Consider Ghost Valley as an alternative pick for Banshee Boardwalk though. For 64, I almost chose Frappe Snowland instead of Wii Mario Circuit, but decided against that since I didn't have a Mario Circuit in here yet, and Frappe Snowland has been remade in both DS and Tour, as opposed to Wii Mario Circuit, which has never been remade. Super Circuit had a lot of track options, but the 2 I most wanted to include were Luigi Circuit and especially Bowser Castle 4. Luigi Circuit would have been kind of a waste on top of Peach Circuit though, and if we're purely going off of the Tour remakes, Luigi Circuit only had a minuscule amount of elevation added comparatively. Bowser's Castle 4 hurts me the most, and if I wasn't already set on including GBA Rainbow Road and even Lakeside Park, I absolutely absolutely would have slotted in if I could. Consider Bowser's Castle 4 and GameCube Rainbow Road as an alternative pair to end the Lightning Cup. I also want to give Sky Garden and Sunset Wilds a shout out as potential DLC. These were some of the more controversial remakes in the Booster Course Pass, and I think they both deserve a chance to truly shine with an overhaul that's more faithful to their originals one way or another. Speaking of, Double Dash had a lot that I wanted to include too. The biggest hit for me personally was Wario Coliseum, which was probably one of my most wanted for next game in general. It unfortunately would have thematically clashed with N64 Wario Stadium, which I feel like is just more of a priority, especially since Double Dash had multiple other options that haven't been remade yet. Not to mention, I already have a second Wario track here to begin with because of Shipyard. I also would have loved to include Dino Dino Jungle, but I couldn't justify including it anywhere. DS is a bit of a weird case since it's the only game to only have tracks that have already been remade at some point. I guess arguably Figure 8 Circuit could have been included to start the Shell Cup, but I would rather have Peach Circuit. DS Bowser Castle and Rainbow Road could both contend for those spots respectively, but I just think the GBA and GameCube counterparts are more likely. We didn't really have any glaring omissions outside of Bowser's Castle, but I figure again, that slot should be saved for one of the alternatives. 3DS also had its Bowser's Castle, but I already had so many 3DS tracks as it was that I couldn't justify it over one of the other Bowser's Castles. And again, Woohoo Loop is always a potential alternative for Mako Woohoo. 3DS Mario Circuit is one that I would prefer to the Wii counterpart, but including it would unbalance the list. Finally, just about any Wii U track could have been included here. There's nothing I feel just has to appear in some way though. For now, I'm pretty happy with where that side of the list is now. The last thing I'd like to do is throw out a few characters I'd like to see. This part is assuming everyone from 8 Deluxe returns, which is high-key likely since we're going to need a bigger character roster with 24-player races. If there's anyone from 8 Deluxe that I want to ensure is a lock though, it would be Dry Bones and Wiggler. Now though, in terms of new additions, I want to first start pulling from Tour. Ideally, everyone would return that was added in Tour, but my personal highlights include Nabbit, who's a prominent enough character in the 2D platformers at this point to justify including. King Bomb is a really cool pick that continues the trend of us getting the boss version of some of the generic enemies. Chargin' Chuck is a character I didn't know I wanted until he was brought into Tour. He has a unique design and lots of personality. Mighty Mole is also a good pick for me for similar reasons. Dixie Kong also feels like a no-brainer, especially assuming we get Diddy and Funky again. Donkey Kong Jr. would also be sick, especially if we're going for the more retro cartoony art style. I'd even take it if he's SNES style again like in Tour. Also, I don't know if we're getting alternate costumes here or not, but one way or another I'd like to see Captain Toad. Luigi's Mansion King Boo would be sick too. I definitely think costumes are likely considering Peach is in her normal dress while riding a bike in the teaser, which makes me think the biker outfits will be alternate costumes now for any vehicle. The last big character I want to return from Tour is Poochie. Just yes please, I need to play as the silly dog in a console game. As for some brand new characters, I know a lot of people have thrown around Goomba and I completely agree. If one can be playable in Mario Party, it can be in Mario Kart 2. Going off of Mario Party, I feel like Boom Boom and Pom Pom could work. I know they're a bit more generic than even the Koopalings, but I think they've appeared enough to warrant a Mario Kart inclusion. Heck, I don't think they should stop with generic enemies in general. Fuck it, give me Cheep Cheep, Bob-omb, Piranha Plant. Hell, Plant was in Smash, so it 100% could be in Mario Kart. I know Spike was also seemingly data mined for Tour before we only ended up with a Mii costume. Why not him too? If we want to go into the newer games, of course characters like Happy and King Florian exist, but I think they could go even crazier. For Odyssey, for example, they could choose residents from basically any kingdom. Like, we could get some genuinely wild characters if they wanted to. Emphasis on if they wanted to. Anyway though, that's it for this video. I wanted to talk about Mario Kart 9 one way or another before we get our big full reveal. It's insanely exciting that we're finally on the cusp of a new Mario Kart game like this after so long. Tour and the Booster Course Pass were good to hold us over for the time being, but now it's finally time to eat again for real. For now though, I'll see you guys on the other side of the direct. Bye! and before they bring back Figure 8 Circuit, and it manages to be my favorite track.